Since March 23rd, my office convened the virtual AU Youth Consultation on COVID-19 in the form of focal group discussion with 400 youth leaders from 42 countries. And based on the outcome of the focal group discussion, there were two main expectations from youth. The first was the creation of a youth space within the African Union to engage youth decision makers with continental efforts. So on May 6th, the African Union launched the African Youth Front on Coronavirus, which is a multi-stakeholder youth advocacy group to support the implementation of the continental strategy on COVID-19. 20 networks were identified as a result of the consultations, including national youth councils, student associations, entrepreneurs, and civil society organizations. And this makes the African Union the first intergovernmental organization to create a high-level policy framework for young people to co-lead the response to the pandemic. So the Youth Front held 5 meetings so far, with participation and support from Commissioner of HRST, Commissioner of Social Affairs, and the leadership of Africa CDC, and also submitted regular policy briefs to Africa Task Force on Coronavirus through Africa CDC. The second outcome was the need for a direct engagement and communication and dialogue with decision makers. And therefore, my office pioneered a series of 8 public intergenerational webinars where African Union commissioners, special envoys, organs, and RECs engaged directly with youth concerns, and over 22,000 youth participated in this series. Besides that, last week, the African Union Commission, including my office and youth division with the UN Economic Commission for Africa and Generation Unlimited, co-organized a virtual Africa youth policy consultation under the theme, Building Back Better with Young Africans. So this particular consultation focused on developing recommendation for today's meeting. We had over 3,800 participants, 950 participants on Zoom call like this, and 2,900 on Facebook Live, and we had more than 80% participants under the age of 35. We also used breakout sessions as a method to have focus group discussion on 5 thematic areas, and we ran a survey that attracted over 1,500 respondents. So I chaired this consultation, and now I have the responsibility to present to you today the outcomes. In terms of key challenges, youth expressed 4 concerns into their future in light of the pandemic, and the data from the survey indicates that the 2 main concerns of young people are job security and food security. Youth in informal settlements and refugee camps additionally emphasize that increase in human rights concerns in terms of access to basic needs as well as police violence. The pandemic is also having an unprecedented impact on education since school closure, with a lack of access to e-learning tools and internet, which should be a right, not a privilege, but unfortunately 70% of Africa is offline. More than 2/3 of Africa does not have electricity or reliable source of energy, and with no energy, there is no digitalization across all sectors. The survey results also showed that COVID-19 affected mostly youth employment. 60% of jobs in Africa are considered vulnerable in the informal sector, and the situation is likely to accelerate or escalate as more young people would transition into the labor force. And so the labor markets are still not robust and resilient enough, leaving many young people to migrate and seek jobs elsewhere, which means loss to our economies and demographic dividends. And also young women are spending disproportionate time on domestic activities and caregiving, undermining their opportunities to generate an income. So these are some of the main challenges. And now I'd like to present to you some key recommendation in the 5 thematic areas that has been discussed in the consultation. On education, young people are asking to scale up the use of innovative e-learning to deliver quality education for all. African youth are proposing the creation of integrated digitalized African library for all African students. And they are strongly recommending to the increase of national budgeting for education with access to educational facilities, resources, and internet, but also access for youth with disability particularly. On innovation, entrepreneurship, and digitalization theme, young people asked for the digital divide to be closed and reduced, and to fulfill the commitment of African strategy for digital transformation. They're asking our ministries to invest and to fund digitalization. This is not just the new normal during COVID-19, this is the normal and will continue as such. So African youth are asking Your Excellencies to form innovator and entrepreneurial ecosystems and to establish centers of innovation and excellence for youth that can help match their skills and education with the market needs. On employment, young people recommend the adoption of flexible regulations for youth in establishing their businesses and obtaining financial credits and resources, and also strongly recommend to create the necessary conducive environment for job creation by scaling up collaboration with private sector and investors, by supporting SMEs and especially young women. On health, African youth recommend to engage young professionals and young scientists in the scientific conversation about the vaccine. And finally, on civic and community engagement, this session among the breakout session had the majority of registration actually, which really shows that young people are committed to giving back to their community, and what they need now is your support. So young people have been consistently calling for support from government to their initiatives and youth-led civil society organization in the form of resourcing as well as training. And they also stress the gap between urban and rural youth, and they are calling for increased efforts to ensure better infrastructures for youth in rural settings. They are also asking for stricter measures and laws to curb police violence in the communities towards young people. And finally, they are recommending the creation of permanent and revert seats and quotas for young people in the policy and decision-making entities, which is guaranteed in the African Youth Charter ratified by 39 member states. And I take this opportunity to also urge the 16 member states who have not yet signed or ratified the Charter to do so, because the Youth Charter will eventually help institutionalize youth participation and provide employment. And in this regard, we have initiated this year a program called the African Youth Charter Hustlers to ensure youth-led advocacy and youth-led accountability on the implementation of the Youth Charter. To conclude, I think, Your Excellencies, that building trust between young people and the government is key. We cannot beat a pandemic as governments without youth engagement, who constitute the majority of our countries. We should not forget that before the lockdown, young people were in the streets protesting, and they have been asking since 2010 for jobs, freedom, and dignity. And we see that the exclusion of youth has not led our continent to the progress we aspire to, because our generation is pained, it's hustling, it's surviving, and young people in the streets are saying we may die of hunger and malnutrition, but not of COVID-19. Some youth are saying it might be the same for me to drown in the Mediterranean, or to join a violent extremist group, or to die with coronavirus, because I do not enjoy basic rights anyway as a young person. So, Your Excellencies, the millennials are carrying a lot of pain and they need a lot of healing. And that's why we continue to advocate for support for their mental health and well-being. And that healing can come from getting out of this crisis, transitioning to a more inclusive governance with youth. We know that young people have been at the forefront of the response to the pandemic, and their stories of resilience, their models, their innovations are undocumented and unutilized by our ministries. And this is the gap. The challenge is for you now to listen to young people, to translate your commitment into concrete actions, and to integrate the youth innovation in your national response plans, recognize these innovations, certify their prototypes, ensure they can scale up and go to the markets, set up youth recovery funds, be accountable to youth on COVID-19 national funds, hire youth tech gurus and youth campaigners who know how to get the needed information across and can help our traditional bureaucratic institutions to digitalize. Because yes, young people can build the capacity of our governments as much as they need capacity building themselves. So, Your Excellencies, just to conclude on a note for calling on intergenerational co-leadership, the average age of African leaders today is 64 years old, and the average age of our population is 20. This gap is the largest in the world, and we must focus on closing this gap to ensure institutional memory, democratic transition, and digital transformation. We need to move, Your Excellencies, into intergenerational co-leadership between decision makers and the youth who are out of the system. So we can co-design diverse tables, co-create the policies, and co-produce the solution that work for our generation. We have already created that platform of co-leadership at the African Union level through the African Youth Front, working with Africa CDC and commissioners to co-lead response on continental level, and we encourage our member states to adopt co-leadership models at national levels as well. I thank you.